I never thought I'd be the guy sitting in his car at 2 in the morning, staring at the dashboard lights, wondering how my entire life managed to burn down to ashes in the span of a single evening. You see these stories online all the time. You watch the Reddit readings on YouTube while you're making dinner or folding laundry, thinking to yourself how crazy or naive people have to be to let things get that far. You judge them. You think you're smarter, that your relationship is different, that your friends are better. But the truth is, betrayal doesn't come with a warning siren. It sneaks into your house on a Tuesday afternoon, hangs its coat in your closet, and eats breakfast with you at your kitchen island. To understand how I got here, you have to understand who Leo was to me. Leo wasn't just some guy I met at a bar or a coworker I grabbed beers with after a long shift. We had been best friends since our sophomore year at Ohio State. We survived the brutal winters, the terrible apartment rentals with landlords who never fixed the heating, the broke college days where we split 20-piece chicken nuggets because neither of us had more than $4 in our checking accounts. When I finally proposed to Chloe, Leo was the natural choice for my best man. He stood right next to me at the altar, handed me the ring, and gave a speech that had half the room in tears and the other half laughing hysterically. He knew everything about me.
He knew my flaws, my fears, the way I stressed out over financing our first suburban home outside of Chicago, and the exact way Chloe liked her coffee in the morning. He was family. So 6 months ago, when Leo called me from the parking lot of a local diner, sounding smaller and more defeated than I'd ever heard him, there wasn't even a second thought in my mind. His tech startup had collapsed, taking every dime of his savings with it, and his 3-year relationship with his girlfriend had ended in a spectacular, messy blowout. He was facing eviction, his car was making a rattling noise he couldn't afford to fix, and he had nowhere else to turn. I remember looking across our living room at Chloe, who was curled up on the sectional reading a book, and telling Leo to pack whatever could fit into his trunk and drive over. When I hung up the phone and told Chloe, she hesitated for a brief second. Looking back, I should have paid closer attention to that hesitation, but I brushed it off as her just being protective of our space. We had only been married for 3 years, and our house was our sanctuary. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial with a wraparound porch, the kind of place we spent weekends painting and decorating together. Chloe worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, so her environment mattered a lot to her. But she smiled, kissed my cheek, and said that of course we had to help him. We were a team, and Leo was our brother.
The first few weeks were actually great. It felt like a throwback to our college days, just with better food and a much nicer roof over our heads. Leo slept on our massive basement sectional, which was practically a bed anyway. He kept his stuff neat, he washed his dishes immediately, and he always bought the good beer whenever he managed to pick up some freelance coding work. On weekends, the 3 of us would grill out in the backyard, sit by the fire pit, and talk about the future. Leo was actively looking for a corporate job, sending out dozens of resumes a day, and I was constantly reassuring him that he could stay as long as he needed. I felt good. I felt like a great friend, a stable provider, and a husband who had everything under control. But slowly, imperceptibly, the dynamics in the house began to shift. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when the vibe changed, because it didn't happen with a massive argument or a sudden burst of tension. It happened in the quiet moments. It was the way the conversation would sometimes lull when I walked into the kitchen after a long day at my accounting firm. It was the fact that Chloe started dressing up a little more, even on days when she didn't have any client Zoom calls. Instead of her usual oversized college hoodies and messy buns, she started wearing form-fitting athleisure wear and leaving her hair down. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I just thought she was feeling better about herself for trying out a new routine.
Then there was the laughter. I started noticing that whenever I came home from work, I'd hear them laughing from the kitchen or the back patio. It was a light, effortless sound. When I entered the room, the laughter would taper off into a normal conversation. Again, my brain did backflips to justify it. I told myself I was glad they were getting along so well. After all, it would be a nightmare if my wife hated my best friend living with us. I was happy that Chloe was keeping him company while he was going through such a dark period in his life. I started working longer hours as the fiscal year end approached. I was pulling 10-hour, sometimes 12-hour days, trying to secure a promotion that would finally allow us to pay off the rest of Chloe's student loans and maybe start thinking about a college fund for the kids we wanted to have. I was exhausted, stressed, and completely drained when I got home. I would usually grab whatever leftovers were in the fridge, kiss Chloe on the forehead, and fall asleep on the couch while watching a baseball game. Meanwhile, Leo was always there, full of energy, ready to listen to Chloe talk about her day, her frustrating clients, or her creative blocks. He had all the time in the world, and I had none. The first real seed of doubt was planted on a Thursday night in late April. I had managed to get home around 8, which was early for me that month. When I unlocked the front door, the house was dark, except for the dim amber glow of the Edison bulbs over the kitchen island. Leo and Chloe were sitting on the bar stools, a bottle of red wine open between them. They were sitting incredibly close, closer than standard social etiquette usually dictates for a wife and her husband's best friend. Their shoulders were almost touching, and Leo was leaning in, listening intensely as Chloe spoke in a low, soft voice I rarely heard her use anymore. When the front door clicked shut, they both practically jumped. Chloe immediately stood up to grab another glass from the cabinet, her movements hurried and slightly clumsy. Leo cleared his throat, flashed his usual charismatic grin, and asked me how the grind was treating me. I stood there, in my suit, holding my briefcase, feeling suddenly like a stranger in my own home. There was an awkward energy in the air, thick and suffocating, like I had just interrupted a private movie screening. I looked at the wine bottle. It was an expensive Pinot Noir that I had been saving for our upcoming anniversary. When I mentioned it, trying to keep my voice light and joking, Chloe snapped at me. She said it was just wine, that Leo had had a really rough day after getting a rejection letter from a major tech firm, and that I was being materialistic.
I was too tired to fight, so I just apologized, took my glass to the living room, and stared at the TV screen without actually processing anything that was happening. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere became unbearable. The intuition is a funny thing. It whispers to you long before it screams. You feel it in the pit of your stomach, this cold, heavy weight that tells you something is profoundly wrong, even when your eyes haven't seen the proof yet. I noticed that Chloe stopped initiating physical contact with me. When I reached for her hand while we were watching a movie, her fingers would remain limp, or she would find an excuse to get up and grab a glass of water. When I tried to kiss her goodbye in the morning, she'd turn her head so my lips caught her cheek instead. And Leo started avoiding eye contact with me. The easy, brotherly banter we had shared for a decade was replaced by short, polite exchanges about the weather or the garbage pickup schedule. I tried talking to Chloe about it one night while we were lying in bed. The house was dead silent, and the moonlight was filtering through the blinds, casting long, cage-like shadows across our bedroom floor. I asked her if we were okay, if she felt like we were drifting apart because of my work schedule. She laughed, a dry, humorless sound, and rolled over to face the wall. She told me I was being paranoid, that she was just stressed about her own work, and that my long hours were making me overly sensitive. When I brought up Leo, asking if having him here was putting too much pressure on her, she became defensive, her voice rising in the dark. She told me that Leo was the only one who actually noticed how stressed she was, the only one who helped out around the house while I was buried in spreadsheets, and that I should be grateful he was keeping her company. That comment felt like a physical blow. It stayed with me all through the next week, echoing in my mind during my morning commutes and my late-night review sessions. I started analyzing everything, every smile, every lingering look, every time they happened to be in the same room together. I felt like a detective in my own house, a jealous, desperate husband looking for monsters in the shadows. I hated myself for it. I hated that I was doubting the woman I loved and the man I had trusted with my life. I told myself I was the problem. I was insecure. I was projecting my own work stress onto my marriage. Then came that fateful Tuesday. I was scheduled to fly out to our firm's corporate headquarters in Minneapolis for a 3-day regional audit conference. I was supposed to be gone until Friday evening. I packed my carry-on bag, kissed Chloe goodbye at the door, again receiving nothing but her cheek, and shook Leo's hand, telling him to watch over the place while I was gone. He looked me dead in the eye, gave me a firm grip, and told me not to worry about a thing. The flight was fine, the hotel was standard, and the conference started exactly as expected. But by the second day, the audit went incredibly fast.
Because our team was efficient, we managed to wrap up all the high-priority reviews an entire day ahead of schedule. The senior partner told us we could either stay in Minneapolis on the company dime for a free vacation day or catch an early flight back home. Most of the guys wanted to stay and hit the bars downtown, but all I could think about was my own bed, my wife, and finally having a night off to fix whatever was broken between us. I wanted to surprise Chloe. I wanted to show up with flowers, take her out to that upscale Italian place downtown she loved, and completely reset our relationship. I wanted to prove to myself that all my dark suspicions were nothing more than the delusions of an overworked mind. I didn't call her. I didn't text Leo. I wanted it to be a complete cinematic surprise. I booked a flight that landed at O'Hare around 8 in the evening. By the time I grabbed an Uber and navigated the suburban traffic, it was just past 9:30. The neighborhood was quiet, the street lamps casting a soft glow on the manicured lawns. As the Uber pulled up to our house, I noticed that the lights downstairs were completely off. The only illumination was coming from the master bedroom window upstairs, casting a warm rectangular beam of light onto the driveway below.
I smiled to myself, thinking Chloe was probably upstairs watching a movie or reading. I paid the driver, grabbed my carry-on, and walked up the front steps. My heart was beating with a strange, nervous excitement. I quietly inserted the key into the deadbolt, turning it slowly so the mechanism wouldn't click loudly. I pushed the door open, stepped into the foyer, and gently set my suitcase down on the hardwood floor. The house was completely silent, save for the faint, rhythmic hum of the air conditioning. The air smelled faintly of Chloe's favorite vanilla candle and the rich aroma of cooked garlic and pasta. They had clearly eaten dinner recently. I walked toward the stairs, my eyes adjusting to the darkness, a genuine smile forming on my face. I couldn't wait to see the look of shock and happiness on her face when I walked into the bedroom. But as I placed my foot on the first step, I heard a sound from upstairs that made me freeze entirely, my foot suspended in midair as a sudden icy chill flooded my veins. It was a sound I knew intimately, yet in that moment it felt completely foreign, like a twisted frequency distorting reality. It was a low, breathless laugh from Chloe, followed by a soft, muffled groan that carried down the stairwell and echoed in the dark hallway of the foyer. My heart didn't just beat faster, it slammed against my ribs like a trapped animal.
Every instinct in my body told me to turn around, to walk back out the front door, to pretend I had never caught that early flight. But my legs moved on pure, horrifying autopilot. I took the stairs one by one, keeping my weight on the outer edges of the steps so the wood wouldn't creak. The darkness of the house felt heavy, almost suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides. With every step I climbed, the sounds from our master bedroom grew clearer, sharper, and utterly undeniable. There was the rhythmic, familiar creak of our mattress, the mattress we had spent 3 weeks picking out when we first moved in. There was the low, deep rumble of a man's voice, a voice that didn't belong to me, murmuring words of praise that made my stomach violently churn. When I reached the top landing, the door to our bedroom was cracked open just an inch, a sharp blade of warm light cutting across the dark carpet of the hallway. I stood in that sliver of shadow, my hand trembling so hard I had to press it against the drywall to steady myself. I couldn't breathe. My lungs felt like they were filled with concrete. I leaned forward, my eye finding the gap in the doorframe, and the world I had spent a decade building shattered into a million jagged pieces. They were on our bed. Chloe was tangled in the sheets, her face flushed, her eyes locked onto Leo with an intensity she hadn't shown me in years.
And Leo, my best man, the guy who had held my wedding ring, the brother I had saved from the street, was holding her like she belonged to him. He was whispered things into her ear, laughing that same effortless laugh I had heard from the kitchen, and she was smiling back, pulling him closer, burying her fingers in his hair. There was no hesitation, no guilt, no remorse on either of their faces. They looked comfortable. They looked like they had done this 100 times before. I don't know how long I stood there watching them. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been 10 minutes. Time entirely lost its meaning. My brain was actively rejecting the visual evidence bleeding into my retinas. I kept waiting for the nightmare to end, waiting to wake up in my hotel room in Minneapolis, sweating and breathing heavily, realizing it was just a manifestation of my deep-seated insecurities. But the smell of the vanilla candle, the specific creak of the floorboards, and the raw, agonizing ache in my chest were entirely too real. A wave of white-hot adrenaline suddenly replaced the paralysis. I didn't knock. I didn't politely announce myself. I threw my entire weight against the bedroom door. The door slammed against the interior wall with a violent crash that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. Both of them scrambled backward instantly, the sheets tangling around their legs as they tried to pull away from each other.
Chloe let out a sharp, terrified shriek, her hands flying up to cover her mouth, her eyes widening into dinner plates as she looked at me standing in the doorway. Leo fell off the side of the bed entirely, landing heavily on the hardwood floor before scrambling to his feet, frantically grabbing his clothes from the rug. "Oh my God," Chloe breathed, her voice cracking, all the color completely draining from her face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. "Michael, oh my God, you're supposed to be in Minnesota." I didn't say a word. I couldn't. If I opened my mouth, I felt like I would either vomit or completely lose control of my actions. I just stood there, towering over the threshold, my hands clenched into fists so tight that my knuckles were turning white and my fingernails were cutting into my palms. I looked at Chloe, the woman I had promised to protect and cherish, and then I turned my gaze to Leo. Leo was standing near the closet, half-dressed, his hands trembling as he tried to button his shirt. The confident, charismatic guy who always had a witty comeback or a reassuring word was completely gone. He looked pathetic. He looked like a thief caught with his hands in the register. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He kept his gaze focused firmly on the floor, his chest heaving as he tried to find his breath. "Mike," Leo finally stammered, his voice shaking violently. "Mike, man, look, it's not what it looks like. Let's just—"
Not what it looks like? The words tore out of my throat, sounding raw and broken, completely detached from my own voice. I let out a harsh, manic laugh that sent a shiver down my own spine. "You're in my bed, Leo, with my wife, in the house I pay for, while I'm out working to support both of you. What exactly is it supposed to look like?" "Michael, please," Chloe sobbed, pulling the comforter up around her shoulders, tears finally beginning to spill over her cheeks. "Please don't do this. Don't yell. Just let us explain." "Explain what, Chloe?" I stepped into the room, and both of them flinched, retreating a step further away from me. "Explain how long you've been laughing at me? Explain how many times you've done this while I was sitting at my desk late at night, feeling guilty that I wasn't home enough for you? Explain how you could look me in the eye every single morning and tell me I was just being paranoid." She couldn't answer. She just buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as she wept. It wasn't the crying of someone who felt bad for hurting me. It was the desperate, panicked crying of someone who had just realized the consequences of their actions were finally catching up to them. I turned back to Leo. The betrayal from Chloe was a knife to the heart, but the betrayal from Leo was a poison that corrupted every single memory I had of my adult life. Every college road trip, every late-night conversation, the speech he gave at our wedding, it all felt dirty now, tarnished by the man standing in front of me. "Get out," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously low, freezing whisper. "Mike, listen to me," Leo started, taking a tentative step forward, his hands raised in a defensive gesture. "Get the hell out of my house right now, Leo," I roared, the volume of my voice rattling the framed pictures on the nightstand. "If you are not out of this house in the next 2 minutes, I swear to God I will personally throw you out of that window. Take your clothes, take your laptop, and get out. Do not look back. Do not text me. Do not ever speak my name again." He didn't argue further. The sheer rage radiating off me was enough to tell him I wasn't bluffing. He scooped up the rest of his things from the floor, his shoes held loosely in his hands, and practically bolted past me, keeping his back pressed against the wall as he ducked out of the bedroom. A few seconds later, I heard his heavy footsteps thudding down the stairs, followed by the frantic slamming of the front door.
The sound of his car's engine turning over and speeding down the driveway echoed through the open window, leaving nothing but an agonizing, heavy silence behind. I stood there in the center of the master bedroom, staring at the empty space where my best friend had just been. I felt hollowed out, as if someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that made me human. I slowly turned my head toward the bed, where Chloe was still curled into a ball, her muffled crying the only sound left in the entire world. I slowly walked over to the armchair in the corner of the room, the one we bought together at a flea market, and spent a whole weekend reupholstering, and sank into it. My body felt heavy, like I was moving through deep water. I didn't look at Chloe. I couldn't bear to see the face I had adored for 7 years, looking so completely fractured, so utterly unrecognizable. I just stared at the rumpled sheets on the bed, my mind tracing the invisible lines of a betrayal that had been written right under my nose. "How long?" I asked. My voice wasn't loud anymore. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold gray ash that coated the inside of my throat. Chloe sniffled, pulling the comforter tighter around her neck as if it could shield her from the reality of what she'd done. "Michael, please, it doesn't matter. It was a mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake." "Don't lie to me," I said, finally cutting my eyes over to her. The intensity in my gaze made her flinch. "Don't you dare sit there in our bed and tell me this was a one-time mistake. I saw how you looked at him. I saw how he looked at you. You don't get that comfortable with someone overnight. How long, Chloe?"
She squeezed her eyes shut, a fresh wave of tears spilling over her eyelashes, mapping the contours of her pale cheeks. "Since February," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. "It started around late February." February. It was May now. 3 months. For 90 days, I had been coming home, kissing her lips, asking how her day was, and handing Leo beer while they carried a secret that could destroy me. I thought back to every single interaction. Valentine's Day, where I had surprised her with a weekend trip to a cabin in Wisconsin, only for her to spend half the time texting on her phone. My birthday in March, where Leo had raised a glass to me, calling me the most loyal guy he'd ever known, while my wife sat right next to him, smiling. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it made me physically sick. "Why?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop it. It was the most pathetic question a betrayed person could ask, but the raw, human part of me desperately needed to understand how the woman who used to leave sweet sticky notes on my steering wheel could do something this monstrous. Did I not give you everything? I worked myself to the bone for this house, for our future, for the kids we talked about having. I did everything I was supposed to do. "That's exactly it, Michael," Chloe suddenly snapped, her despair turning into a defensive, ugly anger. She sat up, letting the comforter drop slightly, her eyes flashing with a twisted kind of resentment. "You did everything you were supposed to do. You were like a machine. You left at 6 in the morning, you came home at 8 at night. And when you were here, you were a zombie. You talked about spreadsheets, you talked about the mortgage, you talked about 5-year plans. You stopped looking at me, Michael. You stopped actually seeing me. So you slept with my best friend?" I shouted, the numbness instantly evaporating, replaced by a surge of pure incredulity. "That's your justification? Because I was trying to build a life for us? Because I didn't want us to end up broke and drowning in debt like our parents did? I was working for you, Chloe. Leo was here," she cried out, her voice cracking as she buried her face in her hands again. "He was just here, Michael. He listened to me. When I had a bad day with a client, he didn't try to give me a lecture on financial budgeting or tell me to just look at the bright side. He sat with me. He made me laugh. He made me feel like a woman, not just a line item in your monthly budget. It just happened. We didn't plan it. It started with a conversation on the patio, then a hand on my shoulder when I was crying, and then it just escalated. I felt so guilty, Michael. Every single day I felt like I was dying inside, but I couldn't stop. He made me feel alive again." Listening to her words was like watching someone systematically dismantle my soul.
She was rewriting our history, turning my hard work, my dedication, and my sacrifices into a crime. She was blaming me for the fact that she chose to open our front door and invite a thief into our marriage. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The woman I loved was entirely gone. The person sitting across from me was a stranger wearing her skin, a deeply selfish person who would rather burn down a house than acknowledge she was the one holding the matches. "You're a coward," I said softly, the weight of the realization settling deep into my bones. "You could have talked to me. You could have told me you were lonely. You could have asked for counseling. You could have even packed your bags and left me. That would have hurt, but it wouldn't have killed me. But you chose the most destructive, humiliating path possible. You did it in our house, in our bed, with the one guy you knew I trusted above everyone else in the world." She didn't argue. She just went back to sobbing, a pathetic, broken sound that no longer elicited an ounce of sympathy from me. The love I had for her didn't die a slow, natural death. It was executed right in front of me, wiped out by the sheer disgust I felt looking at her. I stood up from the armchair. My legs felt steadier now, anchored by a cold, unwavering clarity.
I walked over to the closet, grabbed my large duffel bag from the top shelf, and began pulling my clothes off their hangers, tossing them into the bag without folding them. What are you doing?" Chloe stammered, watching me through blurry, tear-filled eyes. "Michael, where are you going? Please don't leave. Let's just talk through the night. Don't go." "I'm not staying in this house another second," I said, zipping up the duffel bag with a sharp, decisive pull. "And don't worry, I'll be back with a lawyer. This house is mine. I put down the down payment with my inheritance, and I've paid every single mortgage check. You and Leo can figure out where you're going to live, because by the end of the week, your key isn't going to work in that lock anymore." I grabbed the handle of the duffel bag and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting alone in the wreckage of our marriage. As I walked down the stairs, the quietness of the house felt different now. It didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a crime scene. I grabbed my carry-on suitcase from the foyer, threw open the front door, and stepped out onto the porch. The cool, suburban air hit my face, shocking my system. I walked down the driveway to my car, threw my bags into the trunk, and got behind the wheel. I started the engine, backed out of the driveway, and drove aimlessly into the night, the streetlights blurring into long, golden streaks through the tears I could finally no longer hold back.
I was completely alone, driving through a world that had radically changed in less than an hour, with absolutely no idea where I was going to land. The next morning found me sitting in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner off I-90, watching the sun drag itself up over the horizon. The sky was a bruised, heavy gray, perfectly matching the state of my own mind. I hadn't slept a single wink. I had spent the entire night driving in circles around the Chicago suburbs, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight they were numb, while my brain played a relentless, masochistic loop of every moment I had missed, every red flag I had ignored, and every touch I had seen through that crack in the door. By 8 in the morning, my phone started blowing up. It was Chloe, sending frantic paragraph-long text messages, alternating between begging for forgiveness and blaming me for walking out. Then came the notifications from Leo. He had the audacity to text me, typing out a hollow, cowardly script about how he never meant for things to go this far, and how he hoped we could one day sit down as men and talk it through. I stared at the screen, a bitter, cold sensation settling deep into my chest. I didn't reply to either of them. Instead, I systematically blocked Leo on every single platform: phone, email, social media, erasing a decade of friendship with a few taps of my thumb. He was dead to me, a ghost who had stolen my life and left nothing but a hollow shell behind.
With Chloe, I sent a single clinical text message: "Do not contact me again unless it is through legal representation. I am filing for divorce on Monday morning." I spent the rest of the weekend in a cheap, fluorescent-lit motel room near the airport, the air smelling faintly of stale smoke and carpet cleaner. It was a miserable place, but it matched the absolute ruins of my life. I didn't cry anymore. The tears had completely dried up, replaced by a hard, unyielding focus.
I called a high-end family law attorney my managing partner had recommended a year ago during a casual conversation about another partner's messy separation. I retained him by Monday afternoon, transferring a hefty chunk of my personal savings to cover the initial retainer. I wanted the best. I wanted someone who would take emotion out of the equation and look at my life through the cold, calculated lens of asset protection. Because I had used my late grandfather's inheritance for the down payment on our home and had kept a meticulous paper trail of every single mortgage and utility payment coming from my personal checking account, my lawyer assured me the house was safe. Illinois law takes a hard look at non-marital assets used in marital purchases, and given the egregious nature of the situation, we had leverage. We drafted an emergency motion for exclusive possession of the residence. By Friday morning, Chloe was served with the paperwork at our front door.
She had 48 hours to pack her belongings and vacate the premises. I didn't go to the house while she was packing. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of a final, dramatic confrontation, or let her see the toll this week had taken on my face. I stayed at a hotel down the street, watching the house from a distance like a stranger spying on someone else's life. I watched as a moving truck backed into our driveway. I watched as she, along with her mother, who had driven in from Indiana, loaded boxes of her clothes, her graphic design equipment, and the small pieces of furniture she had brought into our marriage. The most painful moment came when I saw Leo's battered sedan pull up to the curb. He didn't get out of the car. He sat in the driver's seat with the engine running, waiting for her to finish. Seeing them together, completely out in the open, operating as a unit in front of my own home, was a fresh wave of humiliation that nearly brought me to my knees. But I swallowed the bile in my throat and forced myself to watch. I wanted to burn that image into my retinas. I wanted to remember exactly what betrayal looked like, so I would never, ever let my guard down again. When the moving truck finally pulled away and Leo's car followed it down the street, the neighborhood returned to its quiet, pristine suburban silence. It looked exactly like it had a week ago, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed.
I drove up the driveway, got out of my car, and walked up the front steps. My hands were shaking slightly as I inserted the new key into the deadbolt. I had hired a locksmith to change the locks the second the 48 hours were up. The lock turned with a crisp, heavy click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was completely hollow. Without her rugs, her paintings, her plants, and the cluttered creative energy she brought into every room, the place felt like a massive, empty tomb. The walls were bare, showing the pale outlines where frames used to hang. I walked through the kitchen, looking at the empty island where they had sat drinking my wine. I walked up the stairs, my heart heavy with an old, familiar dread, and stood in the doorway of the master bedroom. She had taken the mattress. The bed frame was stripped bare, a skeleton of dark wood sitting in the center of the room. The vanilla candles were gone, leaving behind only the faint, ghostly scent of wax and old memories. I walked over to the window, leaning my forehead against the cool glass, looking out over the backyard where we had grilled, laughed, and talked about a future that would now never happen. It's been 6 months since that night. The divorce was finalized just a few weeks ago. It was a brutal, draining process, but because of the ironclad financial records and the sheer guilt that eventually broke Chloe down, I kept the house, my retirement accounts, and my dignity.
She moved into a small, cramped apartment closer to the city, taking a low-paying corporate design job to make ends meet. From what I've heard through mutual acquaintances, the few who didn't take sides or vanish entirely, her relationship with Leo didn't survive the wreckage they created. Turns out, a romance built on the thrill of a dirty secret doesn't hold up very well under the harsh, freezing reality of real-world consequences and mutual distrust. Leo moved back to his parents' place in Ohio, completely broke and totally isolated from our old college circle. As for me, I'm still living in this big, empty colonial house. I didn't sell it, even though every realtor I talked to told me it would be a clean break. I want it to stay. I want it to reclaim this space, to paint over her choices, and to prove to myself that I could survive in the place where I was supposed to have died inside. I work normal hours now. The promotion I was killing myself for didn't matter as much anymore after I realized what the cost of my absence had been. I spend my evenings sitting on the back patio, listening to the crickets, drinking a beer by myself in the quiet dark. The wound isn't wide open anymore. It's scarred over, a thick, desensitized patch of tissue that reminds me of who I used to be and what I survived. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust a friend again, or look a woman in the eye without searching for the hidden angles of a lie.
But as I sit here looking up at the Midwestern stars, I know one thing for certain. The man who walked into that dark house 6 months ago was a naive kid who thought his life was perfect. The man sitting here tonight is broken, flawed, and entirely alone. But his eyes are wide open, and he is finally free.